Hello, everyone. Hello. Hi, and welcome on behalf of Humanities Tennessee. Welcome to the Southern Festival of Books and to this discussion with author Rachel Louise Martin, author of Hot, Hot Chicken, A Nashville Story. Please, as you're watching, please send questions through the chat or the comments there. We'll be sure and get to those kind of towards the end of the talk. But I want to make a note that our very good friends at Parnassus, they are the official booksellers for this event, and your purchase is helping to keep the festival free. So you'll see a link to purchase up there at the top of the chat. So please feel free to jump in there and help support our partners. Another reminder that the Southern Festival of Books is a free and nonprofit event, and it's supported in part by donations from individuals. So please, if you'd like to support, you can do so in the app or at their website, which is humtn.org. So my name is Erin Byers-Murray. I am the editor-in-chief of The Local Palette, which is a food and culture magazine. I'm also a food writer, and I'm an author here in Nashville. My books include Grits, A Cultural and Culinary Journey Through the South, as well as Shucked, which is about life on a New England oyster farm. And I'm so excited to be talking to Rachel. I obviously have a love for hot chicken, but I also have some similar experiences in writing and researching as she does. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So Rachel is a writer and a public intellectual. She holds a PhD in women's and gender history from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Her work has appeared in O Magazine, Oxford American, The Atlantic Online, and The Bitter Southerner, among others, of course. And this is Rachel's first book, and her topic, Hot, Hot Chicken, holds obviously a strong tie for a lot of Nashvillians, but tells a pretty rich story. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here today.
I'm happy to be having this conversation with you today. Well, first I thought we would start with a reading. We talked about having you read just a little bit, and then we'll kind of get into the conversation.
Sounds good. I think the place you have to start anytime you're talking about hot chicken is with the origin story. And I figured that's where we would begin today. Hot chicken's creation has become part of Nashville's mythology. The sort of tale locals can recount with practiced pauses and dry chuckles. It happened like this. Sometime back in the 1930s, or maybe it was the 1920s, or perhaps as late as the 1940s, or even the 1950s. Well, anyway, there once was a man named Thornton Prince III. He was a handsome man, tall and good-looking, fine as a peacock. Beautiful wavy hair, said his great niece, Andre Prince Jeffries. Debonair, with a dashing sense of style and a touch of Tennessee twang, or so I assume. Women loved him, and he loved them right back. So this one Sunday morning, back sometime before most of us were born, Thornton Prince III came in from a long night of catting around, and he told his woman, wife, girlfriend, doesn't matter, to make him breakfast. Well, this woman, wife or girlfriend or whatever, she was fed up with his philandering ways. What could she do with a serial cheater like this? Some women look the other way. Others walk out. A few get even. This one, though, she wanted retribution. She started it out by playing it sweet. That morning, just like all their other mornings afters, she got up before him. And she didn't make him dry toast or gruel. Oh no, she made him his favorite. She made him fried chicken. After all, Sunday morning was that time of the week when families across the South woke up expecting to enjoy some popping hot fried chicken for breakfast. This woman wasn't making her chicken with love, however. I like to think she went out and strung the neck of the skinniest, stringiest yard bird she could find. No plump church chicken for this sorry son of a gun, no sir. Then she added the spiciest item she had in her kitchen. Dried pepper flakes? Maybe. Half a bottle of Tabasco sauce? Could be. She couldn't run to the grocery store to get something, Jeffrey said. Nobody knows what went into that first hot chicken as she layered on whatever she had on hand. Whatever she added. By the time that bird was cooked, Thornton Prince III's woman was sure she had spiced it up beyond edibility. As Thornton Prince III took his first bite, she must have braced herself for his reaction. Would he curse? Whimper? Stomp out? But her plan for revenge backfired. Thornton Prince III loved that overspiced poultry. He took it to his brothers. They loved it also. Soon enough, the woman disappeared from his life, but her hot chicken lived on. The Prince brothers turned her idea into the barbecue chicken shack, the business Andre Jeffries renamed Prince's Hot Chicken Shack when she took it over. We don't know who that lady was that was trying, Jeffries said. All the old heads are gone on, but hey, we're still profiting from it. She paused. So women are very important. These days, that angry woman's dish is all the rage. It's on the list of must-try Southern foods in Esquire, USA Today, Southern Living, Men's Health, Forbes, Travel and Leisure, and Thrillist. It's been written about in The New Yorker and The Ringer. Restaurants in New York, Detroit, Denver, and even Australia advertise that they fry their chicken Nashville style. Upward of 10,000 people a year attend the annual Hot Chicken Festival held every July 4th. And in 2013, the James Beard Foundation gave Prince's Hot Chicken Shack an American Classic Award for inventing the dish. Celebrity chefs make pilgrimages to Nashville to eat it on camera. Why has this woman's chicken become such a cultural phenomenon? Hot chicken aficionados and purveyors have offered different explanations for the food's popularity, for why it seems to grab a hold of certain people's taste buds, embedding itself in their guts and drawing them back time and again. Andre Prince Jeffries has an easy explanation for it. My mother said, "If you know people are going to talk, give them something to talk about," she explained. This chicken is not boring. You're going to talk about this chicken.
Oh, that's a great place to start. And I do feel like I've heard renditions of that story over and over in different formats. And I love how everyone has their theories about it. Well, I would love to start. Yeah, I would love to start with your discovery of this dish because, as you state in the book, you're third generation Nashvilleian. You grew up here. You didn't come across it as a child. So I'm just curious what drew you to this story and into actually creating a book around it.
Yeah, well, it was because I didn't know about it as a child. Like you're another writer. Anytime we see these spaces, these mysteries, especially something that is supposed to be so well known, like our hometown, you have to chase it down. You have to see what's going on. How could I not know about this? What is this? Where is this going? And also for me, anytime I see a space or a silence, I start wondering why and wondering what the bigger story around that is. So yes, I wanted to know about chicken, but I pretty early on knew that whatever story I found out about this hot chicken was going to tell me something I wanted to understand about my hometown, about Nashville, about the mid-state region. And sure enough, it did. I quickly figured out that the reason I didn't know about hot chicken was that I was white, and food in the South is still often a segregated experience.
Well, there's so much to dive into with that. My first kind of place to start, though, is I'm curious about the deep dive that you did into basically one family, starting with the Prince family and really going back to research that lineage, who they are, and how they had gotten to this place in Nashville. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that process? Just, digging deep into another family's history like that?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think it's where my secret gossip comes out. I really love archives. I love the challenge of working around the difficulties of finding documents. But the internet makes everything so much easier now than it was back in the day. And I wrote part of this book in the earliest moments of the pandemic. So thank God for the internet and for what has been digitized. There are parts of the book that couldn't have happened without that. But it was a combination of going to the Tennessee State Library and Archives, going to the Nashville Metro Archives, going down to Franklin, because that's where the Prince family had been until the 1920s or so. So going down there and going through their records, an amazing woman in Franklin named Thelma Battle has put together a large collection of Black history in Franklin. And so I was able, she gave me amazing cheat sheets through the work she has already done, where I could find information that otherwise I don't know that I would have uncovered. So it was a process of digging and chasing a lot of dead ends and saying, oh, well, that's not the right person. At one point, there's one of Thornton Prince III's wives is named Maddie Hicks.
Mm.
And I found about 6 potential Maddie Hicks that I couldn't narrow it down from there to know exactly which woman she was. And so drew my best guess, but just acknowledged this is a guess. But in many other cases, I was able to take hints found within a telephone directory, which became one of my primary sources. The telephone directories are amazing. So found within a telephone directory or a census document or something like that, and begin to make connection between people's lives and where they were, and then building the world around that, and using that as my foundation.
Yeah, and I love how you sort of piece together this puzzle, admitting where your holes might be, right? And sort of acknowledging where you could be taking one direction too far, or, you're coming back because you haven't learned enough. But that part of the story for me, like really, it carries you through the whole book, because you feel like you're, along for this like discovery, as you dig into these histories. So, but there's a lot more characters than just the princes involved in this story, and your research of those characters is really fascinating. But one of the characters that is sort of an unexpected arc throughout the whole book is I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but Gerald Gimmery, right? Yeah. So talk about him and sort of who he is and why he was such an essential part of your research.
So best I can tell, he actually pronounced his last name Gimmery. So instead of I called him Gimmery for about 6 months before someone finally corrected me. I was like, stop.
Thanks for that.
But Gerald Gimmery was in charge of Nashville's urban development program from its beginning. In the 1930s, he was hired as Nashville's first planning and zoning director. He took over the first urban development program, and he led it into the 1970s. And so much of what Nashville looks like today is because of him, in both negative and positive ways. He was integral to the construction of the interstates. He was behind, the East Nashville redevelopment project, the Capitol Hill redevelopment project. He was in charge of building about the first 15, I think, of the public housing units in Nashville. So it was all, he put together our first zoning code and determined what that was going to look like. And so we have inherited Gerald Gimmery's Nashville. And he was the unexpected gift of the book. I was going through the Tennessean and I was reading absolutely every reference to urban development or slum clearance or anything like that I could find. Again, thank God for digitized sources. You can search for things now. And I quickly realized that he kept popping up decade after decade after decade. And he gave a human face and a human voice to what otherwise I think could be a very dry part of that story. So yeah, he was a real gift to find.
Yeah, well, and his role in sort of the hot chicken story, it is a story of Nashville, but you pretty directly tie what he was working on with where the princes were physically locating both themselves and their businesses throughout this time period. So that talk about kind of like what his influence was on them and on this whole storyline.
Yeah, so the princes, and especially Thornton Prince and his family, moved to Nashville in the 1920s, and they move into what is now an industrial zone right outside of the Napier housing projects. And when they move there, they're living in a place that floods out regularly. I went and looked at some of the death records there. You know, children in that neighborhood are dying in appalling numbers, and of things that should have been so preventable, of diseases and injuries that shouldn't have killed children, even in the 1920s, right? Even 100 years ago. But it was happening because all of the housing was overcrowded. It was a true slum. There was no electricity, no running water, reports of an entire block sharing one outdoor spigot. And that water was often contaminated and getting drawn from contaminated wells. And so it was really disastrous. So when Gerald Gimmery takes over planning and zoning and urban development, his goal is to fix that, because it's not just this one neighborhood. That's actually much of Nashville. Unless you were quite wealthy in Nashville in that era, you were living in something that we would probably today consider to be substandard and dangerous housing. And so he attacks that head on. The problem is he attacks it head on without talking to the people who are living in those neighborhoods. Very often his method of attacking it is to displace those people, and that's what happens to the princes repeatedly. Gimmery and his contractors and construction workers come in and just raze entire neighborhoods across the city, and the people who are living there, people like the princes, are forced out. There isn't enough other housing for them, and so then they are moved into neighborhoods where overcrowding gets even worse, where there are even fewer services. I was flabbergasted to discover that into the 1960s, there were still streets in Nashville that weren't downtown Nashville, what we would consider the heart of the city today, that weren't connected to water, sewer, electricity, any of those basic services. And so, yeah, basically Gerald Gimmery chased the princes around Nashville. And doing some good, but also doing a lot of damage in the process.
Yeah, well, and I think you know it's like that. There was no malice intended. It was actually intended to do good in the grander scheme, but it ended up physically segregating the city in so many ways. What his actions, you know, ended up producing was the Nashville that we still see today in a lot of ways.
Well,
so I'm and I
the segregation wasn't an accident. I will add. I want to add that. He intended to segregate the city, and the people working with him also intended to segregate the city.
Yeah. Well, just speaking as of that sort of the black-white sort of issue, I'm a white writer. You're a white writer. You know, I wondered about as a writer, as you know, I found this when I was researching my book about grits. There were specifically storylines that brought me discomfort as a white woman, a discomfort about my understanding and my acknowledgement of things that had happened before me. And I wondered about that in your research as well. Did you come across that discomfort in any of your discoveries? And I mean, you acknowledge at one point in the book that you faced a moment where you realized that you were being humbled, and that you were, as you say, you were thinking to yourself, you need to sit down, shut up, and admit that I may have been wrong and not even been asking the right questions. Can you just get into that a little bit more and sort of how you handled that as a writer and researcher?
Yeah, especially for white writers, I think it's an incredibly important thing to stop and ask ourselves. And I had long conversations before agreeing to write the book, both with Vanderbilt and also with friends and family, about whether I should be the person to write it. I still think that there is another version of this story that should be written that I am not capable of writing, partly because of who I am and what my background is. And so I don't think I have by any means written the definitive version of the hot chicken story. I do have, for me, the way I got it, I ended up justifying it in my own head, is that I was writing about urban development and I was talking about the history of race in Nashville. And as a white Nashvilleian, that is my responsibility to take that on and to begin addressing that and reconstructing that and understanding that the city around me didn't happen by accident. It wasn't a case of kismet. It was a series of choices by people who were a lot like me. And so fixing the mess they made is my job. So, but no, there were definitely places where I know that people who knew Thornton Prince or who are part of the hot chicken story did not tell me stories or decided not to share things with me. And I really respect that choice on their part. I get it. I understand that I'm inheriting a history of problems and of trouble. And that's part of my job, is to work it through. And a lot of times that does mean sitting down and shutting up. Just getting out of the way. You know, again, to my mind, that was one of the big things Gerald Gimmery never did. He never listened. He believed he knew best. And I think today, you know, we talk about trying to untangle and unknit and undo the damage that was done to places like Jefferson Street. And there are some amazing suggestions, like the cap going over Jefferson Street. That's part of the current infrastructure plan. And that's so exciting, but we cannot, as white Nashville or as official Nashville, just say, oh, again, we know best, we're going to do this. All the way through, we need to be talking to people in the neighborhood. We need to be protecting the people in the neighborhood and not repeating the mistakes that Gerald Gimmery and others like him have made.
No, I think that is a good justification for, you know, for where we can do the work that we need to do and also help present storylines in new ways that are more realistic, more truthful, right? More looking at the honest history and truthful history. So I appreciate you answering that one. So, you know, I also find that anytime I research a project, I learn something new about myself, about myself and my relationship with whatever the topic is, but also the space that I'm, you know, occupying. What kind of things did you learn about yourself while you were researching and writing this? I mean, you know, doing this in a pandemic must have been an entirely other set of challenges, but yeah, I'm curious what you kind of picked up about yourself along the way.
Yeah. Well, I really hope to one day launch a book not in a pandemic. I'll say that. Fingers crossed.
Right.
I learned, for one thing, that I could work a lot more quickly than I realized I could. And I talk about this in the introduction. My deadline was very tight. And I went into the project because I had already written the piece for the Bitter Southerner. I went into it assuming I had about 20% of the work done. And so I agreed to the deadline. And well, in the Bitter Southerner, I say Thornton Prince was never married. And then I found, I think it was 5 marriage certificates. So by the second week of the project, I knew nothing, and I was starting from scratch. So yeah, I learned how to triage and how to move, how to just get words on the page. But I think I uncovered or deepened my love of research, and also of using these unexpected smaller stories to tell the bigger narrative. So, you know, to talk about chicken as a way of explaining urban development, not just in Nashville, because exactly the same thing happens in cities across the nation, from Los Angeles to New York. And that a piece of chicken can be multi-purposed in such a way that it brings me joy to find those little unexpected micro histories that work for the larger good.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of those micro histories, again, the characters really come alive in this story, and these are people that you're recreating from history and from historical records. But the best part about the whole book is that you're trailing after the woman. You know, we've already heard Thornton's side of the story, and and so you take the track of, I'm going to follow this. Who is this woman? path. And I don't think you ever, I'm not going to give it away, but you have a couple theories. But what I love is that each of those women becomes a lifelike person on these pages. You start to understand what their struggles were, what Thornton might have really been like in real life, like what they were, kind of how they were grappling with, like with, their daily lives, but also kind of the bigger reflection of what's happening around them in the city. But that part I really enjoyed was how you traveled to follow the women. And I wondered if I know you have studied women and gender's history, but was that sort of another thing for you to kind of like that pulled you through the whole research process, was like, I'm going to find out who this woman was?
Yes. And when I started it, I didn't think I could find I didn't realize I could find as much information about these women as I could. And so it was really thrilling for me. Like, if I was going to say Gerald Gimmery was one of the gifts of the research process, finding out as much as I did about these women's lives was the other big gift. It has always really bothered me that she just disappears and we're like, oh, well, angry woman, now we're done. Like, she was mad. We're going to sell her product. Sell her anger. Yeah, that on a feminist level, that bothers me. So I wanted to pull as many of these women's names and stories back into the narrative as possible, and give them their lives, give them their not their dignity, but give them their stories. We'll never know who exactly she was. That has been lost, but I've got some suggestions. I'm worried that I just lost Erin. Speaking of losing people. Okay. Well, until Erin comes back, I guess I get to go rogue and just do whatever I want to with this talk. Oh, she's back. Good. I was about to
apologize. Oh, technology. Love it. Sorry.
You're good.
So I didn't hear the end of that, but I imagine you were going with it where I thought you were going with it. So, but I have to ask, I mean, of all of the, and maybe you answered this, but of all of the women, is there just one that you're like, this is the one?
I'm not sure that I know that. There are a few of the women there were a few of the women where, when I found their death certificates especially, it absolutely broke my heart. And one of those, and of course now we're talking, so I've blanked on her name, so I need to cheat real fast. But one of those women is Thornton's first wife. And she, for me, was just Gertrude. That's who she was, Gertrude Claybrook Prince. I really felt for her. I felt like I could reconstruct more of her life than I probably could. She was one where I wanted to read between the lines and launch a whole historical novel about what had happened in her life and her marriage. And I had to repeatedly draw myself back and say, no, you're going to say what you can prove. And then you can say maybe, but you can't go past that. But I really felt for Gertrude. And when I found her death certificate and saw how she had died and how alone she seemed to have been at her death, I called my mom. I mean, it was one of those moments. Like, I just called my mom and said, this is heartbreaking to me. Caroline Bridges, another one of Thornton Prince's wives, who is the last one who possibly could have invented hot chicken. I also really, really loved her. I think she must have been a really interesting woman. And I found her house, and I still drive by her house periodically because I just liked Caroline. She had also had a bit of a rough history in terms of how things had played out. She had already had one husband die. She had had another failed marriage. But she kept going. She was very tenacious and had a lot of stick-to-itiveness, and I appreciated that about her. So those were my two favorites of the women, but yeah, no,
No closer to understanding who it was.
No, beyond just, I want it to be one of those two.
Well, and also speaking of women, I mean, Miss Andre was, I guess, instrumental, helpfully in your research. But what sort of how has she approached the release of the book and sort of understanding the research that you did? I mean, have you been able to connect with her about it since it came out?
Not much, no. Which I hate. Um, they some members of the family did attend the first book event and participated in some of that conversation, but no, it has not been. Yeah, I hope that they like the book. I will say that. It worries me, but I also know they've launched a new business on Broadway and life is very, very busy, and it is a family-run restaurant. So I'm telling myself that that's what's going on. I hope that is true. Um, all right, I think I go. Oh no, she's back.
I am so sorry. Oh, of course, this is,
Technology has been buggy all week.
Oh, I know. Well, and I questions. I'm not sure if we have any questions from the audience just yet, but if you're there and you're willing to throw in some questions for us, please do. I also, wanted to hear a little bit, Rachel, about kind of what you're working on now and any projects that you've got coming up as well.
Yes, so I am deep into my next book. And it is a long-term project. I started it in 2005 when I was on a research fellowship at the Center for Historic Preservation down at Middle Tennessee State. If you can hear my cats, I'm sorry. They're locked away, but they're staging a revolution. Anyway, so it's about the desegregation of Clinton High School. It is a book called Out of the Silence, and it will be published by Simon & Schuster in February 2023.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited. Yeah, this one has been if Hot Chicken was fast, this one has been long. So.
Well, I imagine there's so much to dig into on that one as well. Are you finding that some of the research techniques you picked up during Hot Chicken you can kind of apply now as well?
I have, actually. Yeah, I would have assumed after 15 years I had found everything I was going to find, and I've conducted over 60 oral history interviews in the town. Like, I really thought I had my archive together. But the process of doing Hot Chicken taught me a lot about genealogical research I didn't know before. And so I've been using that in the Clinton Project, going back into each of the participants and the major characters' lives and seeing just what got them to 1956. How did they land outside Clinton High School? Because again, life is very seldom about accidents. It's a lot about choices.
So. Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, I feel like that that ability to thread those stories into something that's kind of bigger than what the research shows is sort of the talent as well. Do you, just as a kind of writer to write, do you find that when you're kind of deep in that research, how are you sort of taking that research and distilling it into storylines? Like, what's your, what do you how are you motivated to make those histories sort of, into editorial, I guess, if you want to put it that way?
Oh, that is so hard, isn't it? I mean, this is, yeah, as you've said, with the work you've done, you have experience doing this, where you just have thousands upon thousands of pages of random documents. For me, it's about beginning to put things in order, and I don't just mean chronologically, but finding the little details that I can trace throughout. I guess if I was writing fiction, we might talk about these as tropes or something like that. But so it's about finding common words or common phrasing or something that begins to create connections, and then building from there. and also allowing myself to write way too much and edit down until it is distilled, because I find I often don't know what I need to know until I've begun the process of writing. So also saving all documents in multiple places so I can always go back to them.
That is such a trick that you don't expect to need until you start doing it. You just don't want to lose those little nuggets, which can show up anywhere. And yeah.
Yes. You never. What was it this past weekend? Oh, this weekend I was working on a chapter for the new book, and I had uncovered that somebody's dad had died at the beginning of the story, and then in February, so in August, this guy's dad dies, and I had just filed that obit away, and sort of said, well, I kind of remember this guy's name, but I don't think he was that important. And then I get to February, and he's all of a sudden center of the story. It's like, oh, and his dad died, and I can you can do something with that. He has a few quotes where you're like, oh, okay, this now really fits in. I'm glad I didn't toss the obit and instead was able to pull it out of a computer file.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I feel like you do such an amazing job of sourcing everything and kind of keeping track of that, but all of those details along with it, you probably have this wealth of, knowledge that you're just trying to distill into this, this one little storyline, which, but hopefully that means other books. I love that idea of a historical novel about Gertrude, if you wanted to throw that into your mix of other projects.
It might happen one day. I really do love Gertrude. And the other thing I learned, I've been continually refining how I label computer files, and I have finally decided that the ability to search my file names is essential, and so that every detail I might ever want, from the date of the publication through what is present in the file, all goes in a very long title so I can search it.
Well, we do have a question here. Simone Boyd wanted to see if you don't mind talking about the tension, if there is any, between Hattie B's and Prince's. I'm thinking about the history of urban renewal and the damage in relation to the story of Hot Chicken, if you want to get into that one.
Yeah. So the Princes, and especially Miss Andre, are so very politic and polite about that question. What she told me was that there is room for many people to make hot chicken. Nobody makes her hot chicken, so her customers always come back to her. They might stray, but they come back. And that should be true. If you get choices, you should always do that. So in terms of there being any sort of direct talk about each other, that I don't know about, but I think that there should be some resentment on the part of the Princes for just how everything from business loans to political access has played out over the past 30 years, as the barbecue chicken shack became Prince's Hot Chicken and then became Nashville Hot Chicken. There have been moments when I know that Miss Andre really wanted to expand the business and even had an idea of where she wanted to go, and didn't have the resources or the pull to make it happen, to get the zoning approved and to get the loans approved and to make all that go down. And before anybody starts to say, oh, well, that's just one story, or she just needed a better business planner or anything like that, if you look at the numbers to this day, Black businesses do not get the amount of business loans that white businesses do. Black business owners do not receive the same decisions when they go before zoning boards that white business owners do. So it is still a racial issue who has access to the right to build and expand their businesses. And so I hope, and I know that, they recognize that. I suspect that they have some very justified anger around those questions, and I hope that Nashville and official Nashville begins to address some of those issues head on. I mean, it's amazing that we finally have some Black businesses on Broadway. What's amazing is that it took us till 2021 to do it. So it's great that the Princes are finally downtown. But why in the world is it not till now?
Right.
And there's still not the business on the corner. There's still another business, a white-owned business, hot chicken business that is right there on the street, and you have to look. You have to want to eat Prince's hot chicken. That's an issue.
No. Yep, it is. It is. Well, and I mean, that wasn't the only sort of point of tension in the story of hot chicken, because you've also got Bolton, you know, who he starts with the Prince's recipe. Basically, he's cooking there, and then spins off to do his own thing. So, but I do appreciate all of the voices in the book, sort of, and the way that you basically pose that question to them, like, you know, what are there any hard feelings, right, about how this has progressed? But no, I think there are, I feel like there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, especially on that front in the business side of things. So,
yeah. Well, and again, when you have the choice of where you're going to go eat hot chicken, I would encourage everybody, to think about it. There are some amazing, choose Prince's or choose Bolton's or choose Helen's. There are some amazing hot chicken shacks around Nashville right now that are owned and operated by Black women. Several of them have connections to the historic story of hot chicken. Check them out. Sponsor their businesses. Vote with your money.
Exactly. Well, it's a good message to end on. And I'm just curious, you sort of state your position on your own feelings about hot chicken, but how frequently would you say you eat hot chicken these days?
Well, I'm such a wimp. I eat hot chicken, I would say, less than monthly, more than seasonally, but I'm always eating mild. So I don't even know if it counts as hot chicken.
Well, as you point out, that might be the original recipe. So,
Yeah. Maybe I'm such a historian. I'm so loyal to the past. I don't know.
All right. Well, we're going to go with that.
Thank you so much, Erin. And also thank you to the festival. I'm thrilled to have gotten to do this.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for your time. To everyone out there who's watching, please don't forget to buy the book. It's through our partner bookseller, Parnassus, who Rachel and I are both big fans of. And thank you so much to Humanities Tennessee for the invitation. And Rachel, thanks so much.
Yeah, great to talk.